Welcome to Dark Web 101. In this video, I'm going to go into a lot more detail about the dark web and how it all works. Also, I'm going to be providing a lot of information and advice for those who are concerned about identity thieves or who are potentially currently have been impacted and have had their identity stolen. Anyone who subscribes to this channel, I'm going to be offering free advice. So please subscribe, post your comments. I do check them daily and more than happy to give free advice on how to better protect your identity. If you have thoughts, concerns, or you're currently the victim of identity thieves, I've been more than happy to answer any questions you have for those who subscribe to this channel. If you don't feel comfortable asking questions in the comments, try to contact me through this channel and we could potentially talk offline. With that, let's jump into it. Dark Web 101. What is it and how do I protect myself and my family from the ongoing threat of identity theft? In this presentation, we're going to look at a few things. One is 3 core things I want you to take away if you take away nothing else. The second is looking at different groups that actually make up the dark web. The third thing we're going to look at is prices. How much stuff is being sold and why. And if you go back, 10, 15 years, this really wasn't a major problem that seems to be affecting, millions and millions of people around the world every day and every week. And so we're going to look at some of the reasons for this, the expansive growth of data on the dark web, the increase in data breaches, all these factor into a lot of this growth in identity theft. Do a little quick demo because I want you to get a taste of what this mysterious thing is. A lot of the pieces of the dark web are overhyped, they're commercialized, movies and TV shows. So I'm going to give you a real taste of what it is and what it really is all about. Then we are going to dive into actual protection steps that you can take. We're going to look at things, whether it be identity protection software, how to manage your passwords. And then also, I'm going to add a 10-point list around prevention, or in the event you are a victim of identity theft. These are some of the things you should be thinking about and taking preemptively. So think of it as kind of a preparation list, and just like what you have a preparation list if there's ever a fire in your house, what do you do? Where do you go? What are the things you need to think about? Basically have this 10-point list for you guys to think about, look at, and hopefully implement in your own life. So if you only remember 3 things today, I want you to remember these 3 things. One is just the dark web is not a fixed place that can be measured. It's always growing and changing. That's a lot of the misperception and confusion around the dark web. Why isn't it shut down? How does this happen? If it does happen to me, can I find out who did it? Those are things that are nearly impossible to find out because really the dark web is a combination of websites, forums, chat rooms that are spread across the world in many, many different countries. Companies with ID protection software don't reach out and scan the dark web per se. They use a combination of scripts and machine learning and human intelligence to pull data safely into their platforms to analyze and alert their customers. So this is often a confusing point based on the first bullet of, hey, if the dark web's not a fixed place, is a lot of the identity protection software or services that are out there, are they scams or fake? And the answer is no. There is a lot of really good software out there that can preemptively help consumers at the end of the day to really manage and protect their identity. And then what I call the 4 P's of protecting your identity: patching, passwords, public Wi-Fi, and protection services. And we'll dive into these a little bit more in detail later on in the presentation. So what is the dark web? It's often illustrated as an iceberg. I know most people who have been in this space or maybe have seen other presentations like this are a little bit sick of this iceberg, but really it is the easiest way to articulate and illustrate the different layers that make up the internet. So the vast majority of the internet is not something that you can easily or readily get access to. There's the surface web piece, which is the piece that we all kind of know and love for the most part. Google, Bing, Wikipedia, your favorite entertainment sites, Netflix, Amazon. Those all make up the surface web. And really, those are just the sites that are indexable by a search engine. The deep web makes up the vast majority of the internet, and often the deep and dark web are conflated. The deep web is not a dangerous or nefarious place. The deep web consists of the network of your local doctor or dentist. It's your corporate website. It's government websites. It's maybe your financial planner, their own private networks. Really, what constitutes the deep web is internet search engines can't see the databases and the deeper parts of those networks. Usually you need some type of credential. You need a name and a password. So your email account, let's say you have a Gmail account. Obviously a Google search or a Bing search is not going to show up the detailed messages you receive in your email. You have to log into your Gmail account to get access to your Gmail account, and then you can see all the content that is in your Gmail account, right? So that is what constitutes the deep web. You need access credentials in order to really view the parts of the data that make up the deep web. The dark web, often you need special browsers, special software. People can build personas in certain forums to get credibility and to get access to deeper and deeper links. And, there is a lot of drug trafficking, there is a lot of illegal activity, but the dark web also has a positive side where a lot of journalists and political dissidents will use it because at the end of the day, the dark web is merely a vehicle to securely and anonymously transfer information and communicate with people. So how does information get onto the dark web? Well, there's really 5 main groups. The first group is your hackers and your anarchists. And so they're there not really to make money. They're there to disrupt, to make political statements, make technical statements, and often sometimes it's just for the fun of it. The second main group is nation states. And so recently I have another video that you can check out. It's about the recent the Equifax breach from 2 years ago. So 4 Chinese spies have been indicted around the Equifax breach, which affected basically half of all Americans with a credit report. And so some of the big nations that are out there in terms who are actively doing this, Russia, China, Iran, and some of the countries in South America have started to become a little bit of a hotbed of this type of dark web activity. The third is organized crime, and this is really where there's been a real explosion of data on the dark web. Organized crime has figured out a way to automate and optimize and monetize a lot of the data that can be easily stolen. Think of it as a little bit of a virtual mugging. It's a lot more cost effective to hack into a computer on some company's website or your local dentist and get potentially hundreds or thousands of pieces of personal information rather than trying to rob someone on a street corner. The fourth group are anarchists, and they are really purely dedicated to disruption. They are different than the hacker groups. The hacker groups are often, can be called script kiddies. So think of those as your traditional individuals in Hollywood movies who are the teenager in their basement trying to have fun, hack into a government website just for the fun of it. Anarchists are really looking to disrupt. They really don't have a financial motivation. They potentially have a legitimate grudge that's causing a lot of this activity. They may, the grudge may or may not be legitimate, but at the end of the day, they're really not doing it for fun. They're really doing it to disrupt. And then the fifth one is disgruntled employees. A lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but a decent percentage of data can often end up on the dark web for sale for employees who potentially maybe didn't get a raise this year or just are not happy with the general state of the business, and they have access to a lot of sensitive personal information. Also, data can be exfiltrated by accident. Often keeping up with security protocols and measures is difficult for any business, whether it be large or small, but particularly small companies. So people can accidentally get leak information that is, confidential or very sensitive or potentially restricted by transferring it from work computers to personal laptops. And by doing so, they can expose it to hackers or others who maybe have infected their own personal laptops. And so data can actually leak out that way. The two primary ways in which data ends up on the dark web still is really social engineering is the primary one through spam and phishing. And so you still need to be very cautious of emails that you're not familiar who the sender is. These emails have gotten significantly more sophisticated. The African prince who has has $1 million for you if you can help him unlock his bank account. Those used to be, those were always very clearly spam. They were poorly worded, bad English. Now they've become much more sophisticated, and often they can look like they're coming from a Walmart or an Amazon or a major bank, and they become much harder to distinguish that they're spam. And the other one is weak network access protocols in which a full database is stolen. So this is the case with Equifax and a few others. The software wasn't patched properly, and so it was able for anarchists and others and organized crime to exfiltrate information from really unsecure web servers. Your identity is the new digital currency. So you can have social security numbers for selling as little as $1. Credit and debit cards, $5 with the CVV, which is the security code on the back. $15 if you have CVV and date of birth, and what's known as fulls and info. It's a little bit of dark web slang. Can be $30, and so those are credit cards and debit card information that not only has the numbers, the CVVs, date of birth, but also has your name and your address. So really the complete pieces of information that you would need to order something online very easily and very securely. And chances are a lot of the fraud engines on these e-commerce sites wouldn't pick it up because you have all the key pieces of information. Script services, so HBO Go, Amazon Prime, Netflix, anywhere. Sometimes these can be in the cents range, but let's just say for a bundle of these, anywhere from $1 to $10. These are interesting. People say, well, what do I care if someone is selling my HBO Go account? Is that really that critical at the end of the day? It's not my bank account. The question I would pose to anyone is, well, are you using the same email and password for your HBO Go account as you're potentially using for your credit card accounts or for your bank accounts? So that's where the real threat lies, in that you're using the same credentials. So if they can get into your HBO Go, chances are they're going to start to run that same email and password against more profitable type of sites. And this also applies to reward points, whether it be SPG or Marriott. Those can be in the $20 range. It depends on the number of points you have. They can sell more, but again, obviously points do equate to dollar value. So you're actually having money stolen from you, quote unquote. But also, people can be a little more lax with the credentials they use on some of these reservation sites where you start to acquire points, and they may be using the same credentials on some of their financial sites. Passports, anywhere from $500 to $2,000. These can come in two varieties. They can just be stolen straight out, or they can be forged. The forged ones are on the higher price point because they do require someone who is very skilled in this area. This is something that's a challenge in terms of detection. There is no real way to detect if your passport has been stolen and is actively being used. Other than if you have identity protection software, there are a few different companies out there that if you give them your passport number, they will notify you that, hey, your passport has shown up on the dark web, and then potentially you could get one reissued. This wouldn't prevent someone who potentially has a forged or stolen one in your name to continue to use it, but still it would give you some notification that, you know what, let me at least get a refreshed passport and a new passport number. So what drives dark web prices? Well, just like anything in economics, the two first things we look at is supply and demand. So there is a massive supply of emails and passwords that are for sale on the dark web. So because of that, they are very cheap. But they still are extremely valuable because often that is the key that can unlock access to not only your subscription accounts, but also your bank accounts. So obviously the more supply there is, that generally the lower price point something is at. In terms of demand, still the biggest demand is for social security numbers, emails and passwords, and credit cards. Social security numbers, because when you have that, you can actually start to open credit. You can do what is known as true name ID fraud, which is if you have someone's SSN and full name and address, you can start to open credit lines in their name. Credit cards, obviously debit cards, it depends on the credit lines and the amount of money that's in those cards. And so that bleeds into the third point, which is value. What is the value of the data? How much is on a debit card or a gift card? That'll determine how much it's sold for on the dark web. And then the fourth point is reuse. So things like passports really have extended lives, right? So a passport, a driver's license, those are hard to detect, and those documents really don't expire, for 5 or 10 years sometimes. So there's a lot of reuse value compared to, let's say, a gift card that has $30. The criminal will use it, buy some merchandise online, and then that's it. That item has no longer any use for them. So although these four factors really affect the price of the dark web: supply, demand, the value, whether it be points or dollar value, and then how much the criminal can reuse that piece of data or document that they have. So dark web as a service, what tools and services are available? If you turn the clock back 10 years, everything was, for the most part, pretty manual. There obviously were hackers and there were anarchists, and the organized crime was starting to get involved, but a lot of it was very rudimentary. A lot of it was you needed to have a fair amount of expertise. That really has all changed. Now there's malware creating and testing tools. There's malware distribution tools. There's a lot of phishing templates. So, think about if you have a small business, or, if you ever received an email from a company that you do business with, all that's very templatized, right? They hire marketing companies who build templates and icons, and they have a lot of knowledge around, hey, if we send this type of email to somebody, chances are they're going to click and we'll get conversions. Well, those same principles have been applied to the dark web, and there are a lot of businesses, quote unquote, who are in the business of providing products to organized crime and others to make it as easy as possible, from not only creation of the content or creation of, let's say, a piece of malware or a virus or a piece of spamware, to the actual distribution. There's companies you can hire that will push out all of these emails, just like a marketing company, and provide the organized crime or the hackers information on how the spam attack is performing. Are people clicking? And if they're not clicking, then let's modify the message. Also, encryption, payment methods, and overall this command and control. So what I mean by command and control is looking at how is your ransomware attack or malware attack going. You've spammed and you've hit 10,000 computers. How many of them have, quote unquote, converted and been infected? So this is a real common tool. So this is Sentry MBA, and this is a credential checking tool. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where if you have the same email and password for, let's say, your HBO Go account, well, they can enter in sites up in the top here. So they can often feed a file of, let's say it's a Wells Fargo, Bank of America, as website, along with maybe Amazon, and they'll feed it a file of 1 million emails and passwords, and they'll hit all of those 3 major sites with those 1 million emails and passwords. And even if only 1% of those email and passwords log into 1, 2, or maybe even 3 of those accounts, that has tremendous value. So it's very automated. They're not manually going to Wells Fargo, going to Bank of America, going to Amazon and typing in, your email and password. They feed it through tools like this. And at the end of the day, this tool will spit out a result to say, here are the emails and passwords that worked, and here are the sites that they worked for. And then they can really get down to business. So we're going to hop and do a quick little demo here. I want to give you a real taste of what the dark web is all about by looking at one of the marketplaces. So for this live demonstration, I'm going to show you 3 sites. 2 are on the dark web through the Tor and Onion router. And 1 is on the traditional surface web. As I mentioned, there is a lot of illicit activity that necessarily doesn't happen on the dark web, especially when it comes to data being sold, something that can happen also on the surface web. So this first website, Dark Web Hackers, on the Onion network, you can see they have Facebook and Twitter account hacking for $500, other social network account hacks for $450. Full package deal, gaining access to personal or company devices and accounts, and searching for the data you need at $1,800. So these are services you can purchase from an expert programmer who can basically target certain individuals or certain businesses to try to exfiltrate the data that you are looking for. The next site is www.33DDoS. So DDoS stands for Distributed Denial of Service Attack. This is a Chinese website that offers prices and plans for those who are potentially looking to attack a business. So just like any good business, they offer different packages and combinations of packages. Your best value is the silver package. 2 concurrent stressor attacks, 120 seconds, a maximum attack time, and then over 100 days. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the growth in whether it be data breaches or identity theft is largely due to not only the volume of data that is available on the dark and surface web, but also really the productionalization, the automation, and the optimization around tools and services for individuals like this who basically have set up a company that will specialize and very easily allow someone who doesn't have a lot of technical expertise to be able to perform a fairly serious type of cyber attack. And then the last one I'm going to show you is Dream Alt Market. It's one of the major markets on the dark web. Silk Road being the first one, but there are a number of different alternative markets out there. You could think of these guys really as the Amazon of the dark web. So here's a particular product. So oxycodone from this seller. They have a very high rating. Trust level is a level 1. And they're offering oxycodone that you can ship over UPS or DHL. If we go back, we can look at the main. So this is the main landing page here. So you can see credit repair, you can see game tags, a lot of different drugs here. People selling services to clear people of criminal records. But you can see that you can get access to digital goods, drugs and chemicals, fraud or counterfeit information. So we can see here green cards for immigrants, a credit card, pay cash out, and you can see anywhere from $1 for some of these very basic services. Like we talked about earlier, it depends on the value, the demand, the reusability. Something like this, a green card, obviously is $12,000 because it has a lot of reuse and it's something that's going to be, if it's done well, it will avoid people being alerted to that this is a fake account in their name. And those selling, again, like any good business, people can sell individual items, but then they also can package things together. So a mega pack of carding and fraud guide and data. So huge files on how to do it, tutorials, so step-by-step guides of how to actually basically become a hacker and steal people's identity. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that little demo of the dark web and really gave you a taste that often the reality of the dark web does sometimes line up with some of the hype around it. So next we're going to start to look at, now, how do you start to protect your identity? The first thing I like to start with is the 4 Ps. So patching, passwords, public Wi-Fi, and protection software. So when it comes to patching, whether it be laptops, tablets, phones, even your Wi-Fi router, it is critical that you do keep the patching up to date, as soon as possible. So if you do get a notice on your phone, on your laptop about a new update, please be sure to hit OK as soon as possible and let that update go through. Also make sure that you do have automatic updates enabled on your laptop. Generally, that is standard issue nowadays, but some people do have a habit of going in and disabling them because they don't like the notices. Definitely, I highly recommend you don't do that. These past security patches are critical to ensure that you're not vulnerable to a future virus or a piece of malware. The second one is passwords. Obviously, random long passwords, 8+ characters, special characters are all very critical. Use different passwords for financial versus what I would call your entertainment accounts. So obviously, for example, your Netflix account, that login and password should be different than your password login, let's say, for Wells Fargo. Don't ever embed names and address information in user IDs or passwords. Try to keep them as anonymous as possible. You don't want to have, Joe Smith in New York City as your user ID, right? That starts to hone in on combining name and address information together. Having your name by itself is probably fine, unless you have a very, very super unique name. Obviously having your name as part of your email account and a user ID is good. Just don't add any extraneous information. Don't have your name with the last 4 of your social security number as part of a user ID. Security questions. Don't use mother's real maiden name. So this is an interesting, good little tip, in that when there's those security challenge questions, what's your favorite city, or where did you grow up, what's your favorite food, or what's your mother's maiden name. So all those type of security questions, generally kind of in your own mind have a false answer that you give for these questions. So let's say it's, what's your favorite travel location, and maybe it was Fiji. But instead of Fiji, always answer that question differently. Answer it with, I don't know, let's say it was, Puerto Rico or something. You're going to put in there, or Costa Rica, whatever that is. Or, what city did you grow up? Let's say you grew up in Tallahassee, Florida. Don't put Tallahassee, Florida, put Austin, Texas, right? And always use that. And the reason that's important is because if someone has potentially stolen part of your identity, often those security questions come along with you. And if they have some background information on you in terms of, hey, this is your name and address and potentially, where you grew up, they can easily answer those security questions, because people often will say, oh yeah, I grew up, what was the name of the street you grew up on? That type of information is available through some of these breaches. So try to use your security question, try to have quote unquote fake security answers to these questions. Password managers are also a good way to manage passwords. I know myself, it can be a little overwhelming with the number of passwords and accounts we have nowadays. There's KeyPass or LastPass. I'm not endorsing any of these, but if you're looking at types of password managers, these are two fairly popular ones out there. These will they'll auto-generate passwords for you that can be really long. And often they can autofill some of the logins into some of the websites that you have. This type of password manager, I would say definitely recommended for things like your financial accounts, things like your subscription or Netflix. You probably don't need a 20-character password for some of those, but these are often very good options. Public Wi-Fi, avoid in general. And what I mean by that is not necessarily that you can't, you're at the airport, you're traveling, you're at a Starbucks. It's if you're going to use those Wi-Fis, make sure you're not doing anything that is a financial transaction, or that you're ordering anything online through Amazon or whatever website, right? So you can use it for general information, check out news sites, maybe check out ESPN or whatever sporting blogs or sites you like to check out. But often these can be sites and networks that have been compromised. So if you're going to use it, don't ever use it for financial transactions. And never use it if it's not secure. So if it's just really just an open network, doesn't require any type of credential or a password from the person who owns the business, that are just totally open, there's a real high probability that is just potentially a hacker who's probably nearby, who is basically created a public access point and is hoping people log into it. And when you do that, they pretty much can see all of your traffic. And then the fourth one is protection software. So there's a few pieces that make up protection software. One, antiviruses. Make sure you have antivirus on whatever operating system you are using. For the most part, a lot of that is standard issue out of the box nowadays. But again, make sure it not only do you have it, but it's also enabled, and it is up to date. New virus is come out constantly, and those antiviruses often will need to be updated. And again, that is something that if you have whether it be the Windows antivirus that's built in or something you've bought off the shelf, enabling the download and update of that antivirus software is critical. Also, firewalls enabled. Standard issue for the most part do come with a firewall that's built in. Again, make sure that those things are enabled on your laptops and your computers. And then the final one is ID protection software and services. So I'm not going to endorse any specific company or any specific product, but there are a lot of identity protection software companies out there and services they offer, whether it be checking your email or checking credit cards or doing, whether it be a one-time scan or active ongoing monitoring. There are a number of products out in the marketplace that can range from all right to really good. So, and I will dive into kind of some of the things to start to look at if you are thinking about purchasing identity protection software. So, what to look for in identity protection products. There are various product bundles out there, from free to basic to premium services. So I would have, at the very least, check out a lot of different free services out there. So you can look for things like free identity protection or free dark web scans. And at the very least, just check out what generally for these services, they only offer usually emails and passwords. Some allow you to maybe check SSNs too. But I would take advantage of it. Just see, especially for some maybe your critical accounts or passwords or your phone number. Is there currently a footprint on the dark web for some of this data? I would also If you are looking at purchasing and you are looking to work with one of these companies, see if like how they get their data. There are a lot of companies out there that often bolster a lot of their alerts with spam lists. So every one of our emails is on a spam marketing list. There's nothing illegal about that. But these email marketing lists are resold to a lot of companies all the time. Having your email on a spam marketing list is not a threat to your identity. It's annoying, but it's not a threat to your identity. So these are one of the questions they maybe ask for if you decide to call up or consider purchasing an identity protection product. The third, this is a big one. How many elements does the company scan or monitor? Is it just email, or is it just SSN, or is it a complete gamut of basically your digital identity footprint? Things like phone number, medical IDs, passport information, credit and debit cards. All of these things make up your digital footprint, and all of them could be exposed at different levels and could pose different threats. Obviously, SSN is a significant threat because people can really take over your complete identity. Emails, a little bit less of a threat, assuming that you frequently change passwords. Phone numbers can be interesting if you are getting a lot of text messages now. A lot of organized crime and hackers are looking to attack people through MMS and SMS messages. And then things like passports, medical ID numbers. It would be good to know and to figure out potentially, hey, maybe where you've been. Is there a place you're going? Has a doctor or a dentist, if your medical IDs are showing up online, maybe they have had a breach that they're not aware of. So it's just a good educational tool if you can look at not just one, but really probably 10 or 11 different types of elements that make up your digital footprint. Fourth point is, do they have trained U.S. call center agents to remediate issues? This is something that the average person really can't handle themselves, especially if they've been the victim of a significant attack. If you've just had a credit card, some bad charges on a credit card, you know what? That's actually probably the easiest thing to handle. Credit card companies are really, really good at not only picking up fraud, but also they really accept disputes from consumers, and it's really simply about reissuing a credit card. However, if you have had accounts opened in your name, your SSN potentially is showing up on your credit report as being used by a different person, those are things that are really difficult to handle. And so you really need kind of expertise in this area. And also the fifth and final piece to look at is, do they offer comprehensive identity protection in addition to just general monitoring? So are they looking at things like, obviously credit report information, potential arrest records, social monitoring behaviors, payday loans, people's names and addresses can often, if people are faking your identity, obviously, generally, they can be using it in things like payday loans, or they can be arrested with potentially a fake driver's license or a fake passport with your credentials. And so potentially your name or your address could be flagged in some of these criminal databases. So it would be good to know that. Not that obviously you have anything to worry about in terms of being arrested, but it's just one of those things where if you've had your identity that's been cured and stolen for a number of years, it can start to show up in these other places. So looking at I think the flip side of this too around identity protection products is data comparison. So look at the volume of data they have. Obviously, the size of the database matters. You'll see marketing material to say, we have 10 billion, 100 billion, 50 billion. That can be a little misleading. As I mentioned earlier, some people add a lot of spam lists to bulk up how many billions of records they have. But again, if they have significant volume in the billions, chances are they have a fairly good database that can help alert and monitor your identity. Second one, we talked about this a little bit before, variety. If they're just monitoring one field, probably email or maybe just an SSN, that really isn't enough anymore. 5 years ago, it probably would be enough, but the amount of attacks that are happening, people are really doing these multivariant attacks where they're not only taking your social security number and using that to open up lines of credit, they're using your email address to try to hack into your email or some of your other service accounts. And so you really need to look at as many fields as possible, both credit and non-credit type of identity services. Again, quality over quantity sometime. Press them. Does their data contain spam lists? If it does, you may get a lot of alerts, which creates this sense of dread that, oh my God, potentially your identity has been exposed. But again, if you cry wolf too many times, with a lot of companies with these spam lists people start to ignore those messages. So it's important to find a protection piece of software that when you get an alert, it actually means something and you probably should do something about it. And then reputation. Them and they will be around in the next year. So there's a lot of growth because of the massive amount of data breaches, the hundreds of billions of records that have been exposed over the last 5+ years. There's a lot of companies popping up in this space. So you want to definitely, if you want to invest in a company and purchase a product, you want to make sure it's someone that's fairly well known. They look like they've been around a while and they're just not a kind of a mom and pop shop who may be here today and then gone tomorrow. And then the final piece, and you can press any company on this, do they buy or hack to get their data? There are, because of the growth in this space, there is a lot of competition, and I can say this from personal experience that I'm aware of. There are companies that are really walking a very dangerous line of potentially buying or hacking to get data, and that really doesn't protect the end consumer. That just fosters bad behavior. Quick overview of some companies that are involved in this space. Again, I'm not going to endorse any of these companies. You can do your own research, or feel free to add comments and ask me any questions. If you have any specific questions, if you've started to look at some of these companies and do want to know more, I'd be more than happy to answer as much as I can. They all offer varying degrees of products, from free to paid to premium type services. But here's the list. You can check them out. And this list is, probably is doubled over the last 12 months. But these are kind of the dozen or so big companies. So next we're going to look at the 5th P, which is all about planning and prevention in the event you or a family member identity is stolen. So here's a 10-point identity theft protection checklist that I hope you can all use. First is to make a list of all your online accounts and categories to help prioritize accounts to secure first. So I think 3 categories is probably a good one to start with. One is financial, social, and entertainment. Social being, things like Facebook, Instagram, and others. Second is make an offline list of all your accounts and passwords and store in a secure location. I know we live in a digital age, but if you take all these passwords and all these account numbers and store them on your computer, yes, there is encryption, there's things you can do there, but honestly, write them down on a piece of paper and keep them off of your computer, because having them all in one place, unless you are using a password manager and feel comfortable with those type of products, definitely a paper is good enough. Get your yearly free credit report from all 3 credit bureaus to get a baseline of your credit history. So these are free. There's federal regulations that require all 3 of the major bureaus to provide you with one free credit report a year. So it doesn't cost you anything, and it really will help you to see where you stand today, and things to be concerned about in the future if credit lines do show up on any of these reports. 4 is leverage free dark web scans, emails, SSNs, phone numbers. Just Google free dark web scan and you'll be able to find a number of different services that are out there that can offer that. Again, just get a baseline. If SSN shows up, then I definitely suggest you probably take some action. Emails and phone numbers, it depends on the results, but at least we'll give you an idea potentially if there is if you do have exposure. Worst case scenario, if you are worried about your email, Obviously, and it does show up in one of these scans, you can change your password. That would be the first thing I would do. Also, I mean, if worst comes to worst, you can always deactivate and create a new email. Obviously, that can be a little onerous, especially if that email is tied to a lot of different accounts. But if you are a victim of, or an ongoing victim of identity theft, which can often happen once it's happened once, deleting an email account and creating a new one is definitely a good way to deal with it. Number 5, if you do have children, freeze your child's credit file if they are under the age of 16 across all 3 bureaus. It's a little bit of an onerous process. The bureaus themselves aren't synced up where you can just do it in one and it propagates to the other. So it is something that will take some time. However, there has been a huge spike in the number of what are known as synthetic IDs. I'll have a future video about that. But a synthetic ID in short is really using someone's social security number with someone else's name, someone else's phone number, and potentially someone else's credit card and bundling that into an ID and selling it on the dark web. Children are becoming increasingly victims of this type of ID because a child receives an SSN, shortly after birth. But they don't actually use it until probably around the age of 16. They get maybe that first car or that first loan, and then all of a sudden they'll see that they've had a credit file for 5, 10, 15 years, and their credit score is in a terrible spot. So go through, freeze your child's credit files, and by doing that, what that means is that it's impossible. No one can open a line of credit with that social security number once it's frozen. And then obviously once they get to the age where they do need to open up a line of credit on their own, you can go through a process to unfreeze it, which is fairly painless. Lock your credit file in at least one bureau with an online service. 3 is ideal, and these are mostly free. So lock is similar to freeze. Basically, lock is the kind of an automated version through an application or through a particular product that some of the 3 bureaus do offer. Some are free, some are not. So that you can do your own research there. Because I don't want to endorse one bureau versus another at this point. But locking your credit file with at least one of them is useful. Just at the very least, it can at least provide you some level of control in managing locking that credit file. When you lock that file, very similar to a freeze, once you lock it through let's say, a mobile app, someone can go and open a line of credit in your name. The lock, again, is more of a convenient way of doing this because it's part of an app. So if you are, looking to buy a new car and you're at the car dealer lot, they try to run your credit file to open that line of credit. You will get an alert, and it'll tell them, hey, that credit person's credit file is locked. You can go into your app, you can unlock it, and you'll be good to go. Make sure your home Wi-Fi network requires a password to access it. Depending on, and so you can kind of check this out often. You can go into your web browser, whatever one that may be, and it depends on the type of Wi-Fi network you have. But you can type in, 192.168.1.1 or 192.168.1.100. Usually one of those 2 IP addresses is actually tied to your local Wi-Fi, and you should have some type of credentials to get into that Wi-Fi network. Often it'll start with admin or administrator, but often those passwords that are part of the Wi-Fi network originally are defaulted to password, or sometimes they're blank. So this is something that often people miss. They get a new wireless network system. They plug it in, start it up, they get it configured, but they forget to actually make sure that the Wi-Fi network is secure. Number 8, a fake email or random password for non-essential online accounts. Gardening.com, Pottery Barn, Ryanair, something that, have a separate email account. This kind of goes to the categorization of financial, social versus entertainment. For some of these entertainment type sites, have a separate fake email with a separate random password, and have that as something you use if you're strolling on the internet. There's there's an interesting product you're looking for. You ended up on Joe Smith's bike shop, and you're looking to maybe buy some parts or something from that website, and it's asking you for an account to actually do the order. If it doesn't have the guest account option, have that fake email that you kind of use for a lot of these sites that either you don't frequent, or you don't feel comfortable with giving your kind of traditional account. So if they do get breached, it's really not a big deal. You don't have to worry about it impacting a lot of your Netflix accounts or your Amazon accounts or some of your bank accounts. Number 9 is the Google password checkup extension. So recently Google has offered, so you can just go into any search engine, type in Google password checkup extension. It's an extension that can be added to your Chrome browser, if that is the one you use, that if you are on certain websites, it will, because Google does store your passwords on the browser, it will let you know that, hey, you're on, let's say, Ryanair, and your password for Ryanair, actually, this combination has been part of a previous breach. So it'll flag it and say, hey, you should really go in and change your password for Ryanair because this password and account combination has been part of a breach, so you're really susceptible. Google has been, in future updates of Chrome, they're just going to build this right in. But if you have an older version of Chrome, you could look to add this extension or upgrade to a newer version once they have it built in. And then number 10 is two-factor on all important accounts. So on any major financial account, I implore you to go in and make sure you have two-factor authentication enabled. If you're not sure how to do that, it's usually under account security or account settings. If you're having trouble finding it, call their call centers and they can help walk you through it. Basically, what two-factor does is, in addition to the normal account ID and password to get into your account, you tie your mobile number to it. And so what will happen is when you try to log in from a device for the first time, it'll say, okay, this password is legitimate, great, but I'm going to text you a random PIN. Usually it's a 6-digit PIN number, and you need to enter that PIN also before it'll give you access to the account. You don't have to do this every time. Usually most systems will kind of remember your laptop or remember your mobile phone for a period of time. Sometimes it can be a week, sometimes it could be 30 days. But why this is important is if your email and password was part of a previous breach and maybe you haven't gotten around to change it, or maybe you're not even aware of it, if the hacker tries to get into this account, it'll actually say, okay, we need to generate a PIN, and that alert, that PIN notification will go to your mobile phone number. And so you'll get protection that way. So it does add an additional hurdle for someone to try to get through. So it can be a little onerous at times because you need to actually not only know your password, but have your mobile phone with you to be able to log into some of these accounts. But I absolutely implore everyone to look at any of their critical accounts and make sure two-factor is enabled. And this includes any of your major email accounts that you use for a lot of your transactions. So let's say you tie everything to a Yahoo account or to your Google account, and that's where you have the most amount of, maybe you get account updates from E-Trade or from your financial manager. Again, make sure on those email accounts even that you're enabling two-factor authentication. Some additional free resources. So the Identity Theft Resource Center, the name and the website is here. So that's a great resource. They have people you can call in if you have questions or concerns about your identity, or you've been the victim of identity theft yourself. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, anyone who does subscribe to this channel, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have, or if you currently are the victim of identity theft, I'd be more than happy to give free advice and thoughts. You can just post those in the comments. If you don't feel comfortable posting some of this information in the comments, try to contact me through the channel and we can maybe talk offline. Also, there is the U.S. government ID theft site that's run by the FTC at www.identitytheft.gov. You can report identity theft on these sites if you have been the victim of multiple identity thefts, whether it be through your social security number or you're being harassed through your social networking. This is the place to go to start to report this. And while it can be obviously a lot of paperwork, as most government sites are, this information is valuable to the government because they will fund law enforcement agencies more in certain areas, in certain cities, in certain geographies, based on some of the statistics of who's reporting identity theft and what type of theft and where the theft is coming from. And just want to wrap up here. We've talked a lot about the dark web and what it all means. Often when it comes to identity theft itself, not all of it happens in the dark web. A lot of, when we referenced earlier, the surface web, a lot of data is bought and sold on forums and chat rooms and through Facebook Messenger, which is all not quote unquote in the dark web, but this activity can occur on a lot of quote unquote traditional sites. And predictions for the future, there's definitely going to be more and more growth. So going back a few years ago, Silk Road was kind of one of the founding marketplaces. It was doing over $600 million a year. Things are becoming it's becoming more mainstream to use with better UX and UI, which means it's easier for very unsophisticated criminals to leverage the data and the tools to steal people's identity. It will, I believe, continue to get darker. I think as law enforcement, as agencies get better at trying to crack down at some of the major sites, they will find ways to better encrypt, better secure some of the different ways in which a lot of this illicit behavior is happening. There's more of a move to mobile and messaging services, just like everyone else, getting away from traditional websites. A lot of the criminals and a lot of the organizations that I mentioned earlier in terms of the big five, they are moving to mobile messaging services for a lot of this activity. And there is an increase in this multi-vector attack against consumers. So this is what I was saying. If you are looking to protect your identity, protect your family's identity, potentially invest in protection software, you need to not just be looking at your email or just SSN and a credit report. There's these multi-vector attacks where people are being attacked through phishing, through account openings, people having their account taken over, all within a very short period of time, often happening not just from necessarily one, but often multiple different groups or hackers at once attacking someone through these various vectors. And then I always try to leave off on any of these major presentations. Is the dark web all bad? The answer is absolutely no. The dark web at its core provides us a means to securely and anonymously transfer information. So this is good for journalists, political dissidents, whistleblowers. So while there is a lot of bad activity, and it really is the kind of ground zero for a lot of identity theft and the reason for the growth in identity theft, there is a lot of net good that quote unquote the dark web does provide. So one more time, the big three takeaways. The dark web is not a fixed place. It's very volatile. It does have some positive. It does have a lot of negatives, but it really is the ground zero of why there's been such an explosion in identity theft and data breaches over the last few years. When looking at identity theft companies, they're not actively going out and scanning the dark web per se. They have a lot of tools, machine learning. There are a lot of good products out there if you are looking to make an investment. And always remember the 4 Ps. So make sure your systems are patched. Make sure your passwords are long and random. Try to avoid public Wi-Fi, but if you are going to use it, make sure it's secure and never use it for financial or any type of e-commerce transactions. Look at your protective services, whether it be your antiviruses, your firewalls, the various protection services that are out there. And then the fifth P, look at my 10-point list. Make sure that checklist is all 10 are checked off, and it will go a long way in either completely protecting you from being the victim of future identity theft, or if you are a victim of identity theft, it will help to mitigate the impact. As always, be sure to like, subscribe, and provide comments.